Wow. See, I told you, an incredible range of video conversations, and I'm sure that y'all have lots of questions. So I'm going to start off though by asking some questions, and then I hope y'all will come down because we obviously have an awesome panel of folks to talk to. So the first question I have is usually in these types of conferences, in these rooms, and on the media Twitters, there's some cynicism about video in journalism, frankly. You mentioned it. The pivot to video. Mm-hmm. It's fascinating actually to close the way we did since it was so obviously all video everything. But how do y'all think about, and here's another thing is there's these stats get thrown around, I think on media Twitter, they're like, in 2016, I think there was a Pew study that showed that 42% of millennials still prefer to read instead of video, and all the journalists are like, aha! Like this pivot to video thing.
They're watching crappy video. I don't understand this because video is just journalism, and I believe very strongly that these silos of I'm print or I'm broadcast or whatever, everybody's a digital journalist because did I see it on the internet though? I think that I did. And of course, like, people still want to read and do things. This is just another type of storytelling, right? It works better for some things. There's some things that maybe it is better just to sit down and read, like I think the New Yorker piece that they were talking when they mentioned to Meredith. But then there's some things that are better to see, like the presentation he just gave. I could write that up, right? But don't you feel it more because you saw it and you were in it? So I think this idea of either or, I don't understand it. I feel like a lot of the industry is into that. There's a place for everybody at the table. Everything serves a function.
Well, and don't forget the business model. The CPMs are higher on video. Right now, if you're trying to make money in our businesses, OTT is lighting up like crazy, and that's a video play. Mm-hmm. So that old TV experience is now being rained down on all these other platforms, and it makes more money than the print. So that's something at the top we have to figure out.
Yeah, I also, thank you, because that's like something else that I think we need to talk about as well, is people think like, no one's watching traditional video. The internet is TV, you guys. Right? So all of the habits that people had, like if you think of, so I am a first generation Nigerian American. This is my second hometown, so I'm low key from Austin, Texas. And so I grew up watching news because Africans. And so those same news habits that people had when they were like sitting down watching like the Today Show or Dan Rather or like whoever, right? That stuff you can do here. And I feel like Kristie had really great examples of things, like that car thing was really good. Oh, I love that guy, by the way.
I know.
Right? People, you can make things appointment viewing, and then people get them when they want to get them, where they want to get them, how they want to get them. So some of this stuff, we don't have to reinvent the entire wheel. We're just evolving. The same way you move from radio to TV, this is the next.
Yeah. So like at Bloomberg with TicToc, obviously Bloomberg there is video that's been a part of that, but there's also the terminal, and which is not necessarily as video oriented per se, or has been traditionally. Like, so how, like, for TicToc, like, was that like specifically trying to get into video, or was that actually, or try video that way, or is it just more experimentation?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say if I ever get asked to sit on a panel with Yusuf again, it's not happening. I'm passing. But the original idea around TicToc was to introduce to a larger audience all the dynamic journalism that Bloomberg was working on. We had been traditionally thought of as business and finance. And there's so many other stories that we cover. Business and finance is obviously a mainstay for us. So when we were thinking about, I had alluded to this during my presentation, we were thinking about how we wanted to launch this. We wanted to be as innovative as possible, and this is continuing to develop. And video just was just the natural selection. And it's what, number one, I just didn't want to use an anchor. Faces, I always joke that, we're not in the business of this. We're in the business of, I don't want to interpret the video for you. And a lot of times when I feel like you have somebody standing there talking about the video, they're interpreting and telling you what you should know about the video. We just add a voiceover narration that tells you what the story is and give an explainer of what the video is what is happening in the video. we also have put a stress on authentic voices. I didn't want to have somebody who was very broadcasty. I was really trying to push away from that. That was just part of the ongoing, how can we be different? How do we want to adapt? Because we were curating something specifically for Twitter. And to Yusuf's point, the only people, with my background coming in television, the only people who ever gave a flying fig about lighting and makeup and outfits were people who worked in television. Nobody, the consumer didn't care. The consumer wanted the information. So, okay, it may be scratchy video and it may be low quality. They don't care. They just want the information and unfiltered so that they can make the decisions themselves.
So Yusuf, do you think this pivot to video conversation is ridiculous?
I love video. No, the thing is, right, I hear you. I think that our generation have been lied to and manipulated, and the more glossy it is, and the more it's on a tripod and 16:9, and you try and create all these amazing production values, we think you're bullshitting us. Yeah. We actually value real and raw content. And I think a lot of people in this room and on this panel, to be honest, are bringing bad broadcast habits onto digital media. And it's happening over and over again. And it especially happens here in the US because they've invested so much in broadcast technology. Back 5 years ago, I was at the United Nations General Assembly interviewing prime ministers and presidents with a mobile phone. And people are like, wow, you can do that? And I really think the US has fallen a long way behind, and they can learn a lot from India, from South America, from Africa when it comes to being able to pivot to video without the massive cost.
So actually building off that, around being real, do you think that there's also another conversation happening in media today, which is around trust? And do y'all think that video plays a unique role in establishing trust just by the nature of the format?
I know they're going to get to the how of the video, but on the branding part, I just want to note, we've been saying pivot to video. I'm surprised people aren't saying pivot to brand. Because that pivot to brand is the lesson we've learned in running these businesses, that our brand is where the trust has resided. So people know in this community that if it comes from KVUE, it carries our name and our trust and our careers on it. That for us is huge.
I think people trust you more than they trust KVUE. When I was working at CNN, I think people trust me more than they trust the brand
We're
CNN.
the same.
But I don't think we are the same. I think we're moving to a space where...
the brand.
But I feel like a lot of young people trust personalities more than they do establishment, more than they do the actual brand. So that's why you're seeing this rise of the influencer movement. You're seeing Casey Neistat and these massive vloggers that are becoming news figures because we trust people.
Yes. Remember, though his thing did fail. For the record.
Yes.
For the record, that did, and I watched their stuff, and I'm not going to say anything about that.
But Sully, at Univision,
No, I was just adding to that because we talk a lot about influencers now. Influencers are not new. Journalists are influencers.
Exactly.
In our case, Jorge Ramos is an influencer. Our journalists are people trust them. People trust what they're saying, and then this transcends platforms. It doesn't matter where they're at.
Exactly.
People trust and they are the original influencers. They have
so you're
always
trusting
been
the
around.
personality, not necessarily the brand.
But I also think what's really important is what someone said earlier during one of the other panels. Being a journalist, it's not like just anybody can do it. It's a literal craft. There are skills. So yes, anybody can take video and edit it and make it look great. It is hard to be a journalist. You have to be smart. You have to know how to write. You have to know how to put stories together. And all of the basics, which I think even Meredith talked about, have to be there before you can even be successful. So I just want to be sure that we're clear that it's not that everybody will be an influencer, everybody will be able to do what we do. And I feel like when we're talking about trust, back to what Trei said earlier, that's where a lot of people fell off because they were seeing and watching and believing things that literally anybody was making in his or her or their home, right? And taking it to be true. That's separate.
Exactly as she says. Everyone can be a reporter, but journalists make sense of that noise. And that's our role going forward, to validate, to verify, to curate, to make sense of it, to add that context.
So I just really quickly want to weigh in here because when we were taking something, Bloomberg has a very strong, reputable reputation throughout the globe, and there was a lot of hesitation about going into a space like Twitter because user-generated content is incredibly powerful and it's also incredibly dangerous. So how do we navigate those waters? Because especially within Twitter, you can get this fever that comes around a breaking news story, and you just have no way of really validating it. And so we put in a lot of checks and balances with with all of our journalists, to your point about like not everybody is a journalist. There are a lot of people who are out there making video and putting things out on the internet. That's not journalism. That's not verification. And we have been incredibly protective about making sure that if there's a story breaking, what do we know? And we are not joining the conversation of speculation. That is not our job. Our job is to tell you when reliable sources come out and verify this is what you need to know. And I would always prefer to be last, but first on the only person who actually got it right.
Kristie, yeah. To being right, Kristie, like during, recently in Austin, y'all were in a unique position from a local perspective of having to cover, the tragedy of the bombings. Mm-hmm. And, on this topic of like being right, what role did video and digital video play for y'all in making that happen?
Well, before we even got to video or releasing the information, it was all about relationships. And that takes each journalist in this room a lot of time to cultivate those relationships so that, I'm so proud of our team because KVUE, if you watch the different stations, we led the breaking news the whole time. Our news director was up at 3 a.m. in the morning, live. We broke into our programming and he announced that the bombing suspect had been captured and was likely dead. That was, we got those because of reporter Tony Plahetsky. So those relationships then were really how we confirmed all of that news, because if the average person looks at that video coming from the scene, they're gonna interpret it a million ways to one unless they have the information. So that's really where the professionalism of what we do and the experience and the good sources come into play. And that was so huge and kept us in front in the coverage.
All right. Let's go to questions.
One minute of questions.
So 1 minute of questions. The fastest question you've ever asked. Go for it. Go.
All right, well, it's a little off topic, but it relates to the subject you were just mentioning a minute ago. You called him a suspected bomber. He wasn't a suspected bomber. He was a suspected terrorist. It was an act of terrorism, and I'm wondering, why was there such recalcitrance?
Oh, that is not a minute-long conversation.
No. Let me help you out. Let me help you out, because we actually at AJ Plus don't use that term, and there's a very specific reason. And part of it goes to the fact that in American society, we don't use that word when it comes to everybody.
Yeah.
Right? Timothy McVeigh, by definition, terrorism, right? But if you go back and you look at the cover, I don't know what year that was. I'm gonna just lie and say it's like in the 90s.
To back her up, there's a legal definition,
and
we're working with law enforcement during this whole time, and legally it did not meet the definition on the books. To the average person, he was doing terroristic activity. That's why. And that was a really long conversation that happened around our news table.
Well,
we also did a video on it that you can watch.
In that note,
now we get to go have drinks and have that conversation. Thank you to everybody.
Let's leave on a